You're listening to the Career Interrupted podcast. I'm your host, Joy Foster. On the podcast today, we have Dr. Victoria Stakelum. She is an ex-corporate leader who is now a psychologist and subconscious mind specialist, so you can see exactly why I brought her onto the show. She helps people shift the underlying stuff that stands between them and whatever they want. And I think that is a great place to start because, Dr. Vic, you've had some career interruptions in your life, and you obviously had to get to a place where you got what you wanted. So walk us through some of the career interruptions that you have dealt with in your life.
My career feels like it's been a string of interruptions, occasionally interrupted by some continuity. So I've had a number of career pivots. I've had a handful of redundancies. I've had a dramatic, running away from a toxic boss and environment, and then ultimately a major career pivot into a completely different life and existence. So a lot.
Well, I think this is going to be a great career interruption story to get into. So tell me when the stakes were the highest for you in all of these career interruptions and describe that for us.
Yeah, so I think the stakes were highest when I did my running away from toxic boss and toxic environment. I had taken an executive shareholding, so I was very senior in corporate leadership. I sometimes, when I'm introduced that way, I look at myself now, I'm like, who was this person I used to be? Because I'm always tracksuits and mad clothes now. But I had that part of myself hidden, and I was like the besuited corporate leader, executive shareholder. My hair was always straightened and I always looked terribly grown up and credible. And I joined this organization, and I heard on the grapevine that it might be a challenging corporate environment. But I was like, I'm going in at a very senior level. I'm up for a challenge. I always liked that kind of brief. So I went in and I did great work. It was quite a toxic environment, but I was right there. I worked directly for the CEO. I was an executive shareholder. I looked after a broad remit and I affected major cultural change. And we went from being a really unhappy, kind of toxic workplace to being vaguely productive. People were a bit more engaged, a bit happier. I was really proud of the work I did. And then I took a brief maternity break to have my third baby, who is now nearly 11. And I only took about 8 weeks off. I moved closer to the office. I was a bit mad in my corporate days. I've got 3 kids and I did very short maternity leaves for 2 of them at least. And I would kind of stay engaged. So I did a gradual return. But anyway, when I went back in for my keeping in touch day, 8 or so weeks, was it 8 weeks? Might even have been less after having my youngest. It became apparent to me that all of the work I had done had been systematically unpicked and undermined. And I just had this realization that this place had only been functional with me right in the center of it. And the minute I'd stepped away, all of the dysfunction had kind of got back into everything. And there was something about the way that had taken place that was deeply unnerving and sort of felt quite personal. It was like I'd been in the way when I was doing good work, and it was almost like the natural flow was back towards not great business at all, kind of what I would consider quite low integrity, quite toxic, quite bullying kind of environment. And so just sort of a rare moment of like a sleepless night and turning this over in my mind, and a really deeply uncomfortable conversation with the boss that I had kind of gone back in to see, I realized I had no choice but to exit. But at the time, I was the sole breadwinner. We'd just moved house for me to be close enough that I could continue working whilst breastfeeding my new baby. So we had no other income. We had a big fat mortgage. I'd been there 13 months. And I felt that I could not, in my integrity, stay working there. So I handed in my notice with nothing to go to, brand new baby, big mortgage. I remember having a conversation with my father-in-law, and I think he thought I was having a nervous breakdown. He's from a generation where you just wouldn't do something as wild as that. We didn't know how we were going to make it work. So I tendered my resignation. There was a really odd conversation ensued where they kind of tried to encourage me to stay, but it was really obvious to me that the deal was you stay, but you stay in your box here. And I think the company quite liked my credentials on the board. The images on the website, Dr. Victoria. In fact, I wasn't doctor then. Victoria Stakelum, I had good corporate credentials. I think I looked good to the shareholders. So the deal was they wanted me to stay because it was an embarrassment if I didn't. But it was really clear to me that the deal was you stay, but you're controlled. It was like that time I'd been away. I don't know quite what shifted. Anyway, I was not having that. So I stood by my resignation. I left. Shit. What do I do? What do I do?
That's incredible. So you've got this baby, you've got a mortgage, and you take a huge risk and walk away from all of it. What were the fears and doubts that not just creeping in, but like...
Yeah. It was like, oh my God, like, how are we going to pay the mortgage? My husband was wonderful. He had done childcare, like in the early years of my kids. So we didn't have another source of income. We didn't have debt as such, but we did have a mortgage that we had to maintain payments. I don't recall that we had any savings. And I also had some money tied up in a shareholding with the company that I had to walk away from, so it was one of those real moments of, are you going to stand by your integrity, or are you going to take the easy option and kind of keep the salary? Anyway, so I walked away. The fears were just like, what the hell do we do? How do I generate an income? What we were considering is, what happens now? My husband was really supportive, but I think both of us were just a bit like, oh, what do we do? And, there was the fear of, will I get another job at that level? Will I get another job at all? How does it look on my CV that I did 13 months in a place? Will my prior boss and colleagues, like the more senior, the dodgier ones, like, will they muddy my name? Will we default on the mortgage? Will we be able to pay the bills? It was all of this stuff, really. I'm a good sleeper. I am not someone who typically gets kind of swirly, but I remember a couple of days, and I was probably a bit hormonal because the baby was very young still, and I was still sort of in that post-maternal space. I just remember it feeling like my brain was turning inside out, and it was partly the fear, but what was even bigger was trying to make sense of what had happened. It was like I'd done the right thing. I'd been a good person in the way this relationship had unfolded with the organization. Like, I just, I was almost having nightmares over it. I wouldn't normally be so affected by that kind of thing, but it really mangled my brain. I was like, how have we ended up here? So it was a tough phase.
Yeah, well, I just think, I was in a situation, fortunately, with both of mine. My husband had a job. We were living in Switzerland. Also in Switzerland, it's very normal if you are married with kids that one's at home, one's working, because the system's not set up for, anything else. But I can't imagine what it would be like going back to work after 8 weeks, first of all. But second of all, I just can't imagine having to go through that trauma while you're still breastfeeding and you're still, and you've got this mortgage and all these obligations. So, I think you've painted that scene really well for us in terms of how challenging that would have been. Obviously, you came out of it, but what surprised you in this whole scenario as you've gone through it? What was the thing that really...
When I reflect back, what surprises me in a way is that I had one of the best years of my life after that. I found a hustle capacity that I don't think I ever had before. And it was, that phrase, necessity is the mother of all invention. Like, it was just, I had to hustle. Like, things like networking make me like, ugh, I had all these hang-ups about that kind of thing. I had to just get out there and put myself out there. I learned so much in that year. I learned so much. I had a brilliant time with my baby. There was something really lovely, actually, about me, my other two kids, my husband, and we were all just around. Now, I was working hard and I was trying to figure stuff out and, make the wheels turn so that we still had some kind of an income. I think so many people who maybe have ambitions to escape a not very nice environment or to, to set up their own business or whatever. A lot of people have ambitions and they kind of wait until the conditions are perfect. And what I learned and what I really believe to be true is that sometimes you only discover what you can do when you don't have a plan B. And I didn't have a plan B. And I feel quite proud that it was my sort of standing by my values and realizing my values were too much compromised here for me to stay in it, and walking away from a lot of money both in terms of salary, but also in terms of the shareholding. I felt very proud that I was someone who had the courage to do that. And I was kind of bolstered by that. But there's something about within those conditions, just figuring out how to make stuff happen. And I've seen it with other people, and I've also more latterly seen it with clients that make big, brave moves. It's like things always somehow line up to keep you ticking over. I've never known anyone to lose the house or lose the car or not feed their kids. It's like somehow just enough falls into alignment that you cope and you make it work. And from that, new things can be built. And I didn't. So that year I spent self-employed, and I didn't stay self-employed, although I am now. But I learned so much that was somehow part of a stepping stone to what came later. And if I'd never had that experience, I don't know whether I would be doing what I'm doing now, which is wholly aligned and wonderful for me.
Well, and that's what as we call burning the boats, right? No way to get off the island. So tell me what you learned from this experience. I mean, obviously that set you up for what you're doing now. So I'd love to know the key learnings from that experience. Obviously the surprise was, having this year with your family and it all worked out. But what were the key lessons, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, so a couple of key lessons. I think one thing for me was that when I did that jump out of the company and thought, right, I've got to create something, I probably spent a bit too much time trying to build a website, develop a proposition, do all the proper things. And one of my network, we were chatting, and he said to me, Vic, you've just got to pick up the phone to people. And he was so right. And I think so many people end up in a spin of, I've got to write lots of content and blog and have a website and have a proposition. And those things are great once you've relieved a bit of pressure on yourself. But we so often end up spinning in those things. So I learned that you've just got to get into conversation. If you're not having conversations, you're not creating revenues. And so I learned the art of the hustle. And it, I use the word hustle, but it was just reconnecting with people, finding out what they were experiencing, what they needed. It was all the stuff that, of course, set me up for what I do now as a coach, but, kind of understanding what were they struggling with, and then doing a match job between, well, this is what they've said they're struggling with, and this is some stuff I'm good at. Maybe there's a way for us to work together. And from there were born my first clients and projects, and, and different shapes and sizes. And it was fun, and it was a roller coaster. And I kind of got over that. It's networking and that's gross. I just did, I learned loads, and I met loads of people, and I tapped my network, and it was really good fun. So that was one of the learnings. The other learning that I got, and I talk about this sometimes, I've really kind of retained this as a realization, is that I created or connected to a skill set to make that a financially successful business. I did manage to pay the mortgage. We didn't lose the house. It worked out fine. I created an income, and that was great. But energetically, emotionally, psychologically, I hadn't become an entrepreneur. I hadn't developed the kind of mindset of an entrepreneur. So the minute I was offered a permanent job, I ran to it. And that was right for me. And that permanent job was an amazing piece of alignment, happiest chapter of my employed career, and lined up everything I needed, that when I next stepped into self-employment, I was psychologically, emotionally, energetically ready, which is why I think my latest phase of employment has been genuinely successful. And what I've learned from that is it's not just about your skill set. When you have this notion of, I'd love to work for myself, or I want to do something, it's not just about your skill set. It's absolutely about the person you are becoming, and the kind of your nervous system container, because you will know, Joy, working for yourself, you have to take yourself on at a very human level.
It's so interesting you say that, because my daughter is home today from school. She's on her Easter break, and we were having a conversation. We let her sleep in because it's the first day she's had off, and she rose, so she's up every morning 6:45 no matter what. Yeah. And so today she said, "Don't wake me up, let me sleep in." And so at about 12 o'clock, I thought I better go check on her, make sure she's okay. And I knocked on the door, and she said, "Oh, I was sweating all night, and I don't feel great this morning." And, we both, my husband and I both looked at her, and we said, you've had such an intense time. It's your body just going, I'm done, and she's got about a week and then she's got to get back up rowing and stuff. But I took her temperature and it was a little bit on the high, it's just tipping over, like not a temperature, but it was on its way up, and I thought, I said to her when she came downstairs, I said, when I first started building the business that, I'm now 10 years in, but when I first started building TechPixies, they were really little. So she's 15 now, she was 5 then. And we used to go visit my family and of course going to see my parents, and we'd get to their place and within 24 hours I'd be sick.
Yeah.
And it was like I could just relax because I had my husband, the children, and them, and they were self-sufficient without me, and I could just chill, and I wasn't working, but my body would just shut down. And I totally can relate to what you're talking about, especially in the early days of building my business, because that sort of thing happened to me really a lot early on. And then I got to a place where I had to find that psychological balance, that mental well-being balance. And my schedule now is very, very different to what it was 10 years ago. I have every single morning, I have a dog walk, I have an hour to myself to write. I have, I don't even start my day till 10 o'clock. So I've got a couple of hours in the morning, just, an hour for the kids, hour for me, hour for the dog. And then I start my day. And then in the middle of the day, I stop for a workout for 45 minutes. And then I have a lunch for 45 minutes. I never had that stuff built in. And then I really do try, not every day, but I do try and shut up the computer at about 6 o'clock and then really refocus with my family. I did not do that at all the first, probably 5 years of the business. And it was when the marriage started to break down and other things, weren't, physical health wasn't working, that I had to say, hang on, I got to shift things around. And that's when I got into the subconscious reprogramming stuff and the mindset shifting stuff. So I think it's really interesting how we find our ways to that path. So tell people what you're doing now, and because I think it's, fascinating.
Towards the tail end of my corporate journey, I requalified. My first degree was in anthropology, and I requalified in psychology towards the end of my corporate career. And I was already trained in coaching and NLP, which was a gift for me. I was really lucky to be trained in those things very early on in my career. So what I do now is I've kind of brought all of those things together. I do a lot around mindfulness and breath work. So I have a really broad toolkit, but my specialisms really are subconscious mind and emotion, which show up for us everywhere, no matter what we're doing. Obviously, our emotions often show up whether we like it or not, in different directions. And our emotions are intimately entwined with our subconscious mind and the kind of autopilot narratives that play for us. And usually those are the things standing between people and where they want to be or what they want to create. Yes, sometimes skill is in the mix, like I need to learn to do something new, but almost always, if I'm finding something difficult, it's because there's something under the surface that's holding me back or keeping me stuck. And if there's a battle, and you will know this, between like my conscious intentions and the subconscious stories, the subconscious will win every bloody time. It's a tricksy beast. So I help people align those things, basically get the stuff out of the way that's standing between where they want to get to. I help with some of the skill, habit, and behavior stuff. And I'm often the place people come to when they haven't quite managed to get there through other methods. So people often come to me post-therapy. I've worked with a lot of people who are coming off prescription medications for anxiety, depression, that kind of thing. I typically work with people who are quite a long way down the personal development space, but are running up against like the final hurdle. And I'm just very good at helping people kind of flush that up and get it.
Yeah, I think no matter where you are in your level of awareness, you're going to hit up against these walls, but then you can make so much progress, and then boom, you hit a wall, and it can just take a while to get through that wall, to identify what the block or the barrier is, and then to get through it. But I think that's the thing with personal development and self-awareness and this sort of type of work that you do, I do, is that it's never ending. Like, you start on this journey, you discover something about yourself, and then, you work on that. And then once you get that sort of going in the right direction, you then discover something else about yourself. And it's just this constant learning. And because you've got a growth mindset and you want to learn, it's this ongoing journey. But I definitely would say for myself, I've had to bring in different people at different times with different specialties to break through different barriers that I wasn't aware that I had. Some of them might be energetic, some of them might be, like emotional. So it's really important to if you're on that journey, to know that it's a never ending journey, and you're going to find along the road that you might meet a lot of different people who can help you get through those different levels. And I think that's important. Is there a mantra that you live by? Is there, a quote or a saying that, really resonates with you and how you live your life now?
Oh, I'm like the quote queen. There are so many things that spring to mind. And that thing you say about it being never ending, for me, that was one of the most like crushing but also liberating realizations as I went along my own journey, was the fact that there isn't a finish line. Because I definitely started out my personal development journey thinking that there would be a moment when I would have mastery, and I'd be there, and that'd be that, and then I could just like teach everyone else. And it was a bit like, oh, there's always a new layer. But now I love that. And that speaks to one of the, not really a quote, but a principle I live by, is that of attentive curiosity. I think curiosity is like a superpower and a shield, because if you can make it central to the way you live your life, anything that hits you, anything you experience, any wobble you have, any stuff that comes up, any adverse experience, if you turn the lens of curiosity into it, it becomes interesting and you can learn something, and there's something, sort of an adventure or thread to go down. So I love that concept. I love striving for curiosity in all things. And the other sort of quote, like smart little nifty quote that I love, I think it's like an ancient Chinese proverb or something, is the one that says, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the next best time is now. I love that. Maybe it's being a
I
woman of a
love that
certain
you said
age.
that. That's one of my favorites. And I have a book it's called an action book, but it's got lots of images in it. The very first image is of an oak tree. And it
Yeah.
always, it's the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is now. I love that you say curiosity and the oak tree. Those two things are so important. And I think they're fundamental to really being able to live a full life. And so I hope if someone's listening to this and they don't yet have those two things in place in their life on a daily basis, that they do that. I think also one of the things that I tell people, and I would imagine that this would resonate with you, is if they can dream it, if they have the capacity to create it. They may not have the ability, but if it's coming to them, it's unique to them, whatever it is that they want to do, they can do it. And I think, like you said, it might be a bit of a squiggly path to get there, but you did get there. So I'm curious, you said that when you were in the executive position, you weren't a doctor, and now you have, you have the Dr. Vic, title. So I would just love for you to talk about that for a minute. What made you decide to go back to school? What did you study? And then, and how long did it take you? And has that been pivotal to the rest of what you're doing now? Because I think that's important for people to understand as well, the retraining part of career interruptions.
Yeah. And actually what you just said about, like, if you can dream it, you can do it. I got all excited because there's a story here, right? Which is that around I want to say 2018, maybe 2019, I went to a 2-day coaching event, and it was like an introduction to coaching. And I'd already done it before back in 2013 when I had my dramatic career introduction. But I thought, I'm going to revisit it because I'd already trained as a coach, but I thought I might get certified now. And this was an introduction to that kind of stuff. And one of the things they had us do in that 2-day introduction was envision like the dream life, the life that if there were no rules and we could have it all, we would envision. And I painted the picture in my own mind, and I vocalized it to my little group that I was working with, a life in which I lived in a rural place, and I had chickens and polytunnels, and I ran a lifestyle business, and I was heavily involved in music, which is one of my passions. And this would be my life. So this was around 2018, 19. I can't remember exactly which. And at the time, I was deputy chief executive in a multi-million-pound corporate, and I was working 60-hour weeks and not seeing enough of my children. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was probably chronically stressed. all the time. Didn't know it, but I was definitely a bit snappy, snarly, and all my good energy was used up by the end of the week. So the concept, this really did seem like a dream in a bubble, 2 to 3 years later, I was living that dream. And I had no concept of how that would have happened. But I live in rural Ireland now. I have 12 acres. I live on a lake. I'm not a multimillionaire, let me be clear. This is a very modest kind of lifestyle. I have chickens, I have polytunnels, we have space and greenery, and my kids roam free because it's that kind of place where everyone knows people and it's safe. And what was very striking, so when I painted this picture to my little group, they then invited people to stand at the front of the room. There was about 200 people there, and to declare this vision. And my group said, you have to, yours is really good, So I stood up and declared this vision, still kind of thinking this is kind of pipe dream stuff, maybe a 5 to 10 year plan. I'll start. That was what was in my head. Maybe I could make this a 5 to 10 year plan. 3 years later, we were living it. I think what happened was in firstly making that vision, and secondly declaring it. And declarations are a big part of the work I do because they definitely heat something up in the sort of energy of the universe. I think what it did was kind of hone my mind, and in a similar time frame, I decided I would get recertified in coaching. I went on to train, sort of informally certified with that company. I would get recertified in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. So I did both my initial level and then my advanced level of NLP. In a similar time frame, I started exploring energy work, which was a bit weird when I was a grown-up deputy chief executive. I went and trained in pranic healing and became sort of quite an adept intuitive healer, which it took me about 4 years to feel brave enough to be open about on LinkedIn, even after I left that career, because I sort of felt like all my credentials were in being a proper academic grown-up, not in a sort of woo-woo healer with crystals in the background and Buddhas and things. And I have always had a passion for psychology. And I actually there's a whole life interrupted story going back many years, which is that I dropped out of school. I was a school dropout, dropped out of college. And one of the subjects I dropped when I dropped out of college was psychology. It was all too much. It was too difficult. I was a wayward teen. I was a bit all over the place. But psychology has always been there in the mix. So I was running a private university, and my university launched a psychology master's. And I was like, I'm going to join it. So it was just providence. The company I was doing was doing a psychology master's. So I studied, which was also really awkward because I was both the deputy chief executive and one of the students, which for the tutors teaching it was really uncomfortable and weird. And for me, it was a bit uncomfortable and weird, but I got a distinction. I got awarded Student of the Year after I left the company because one of my dissertations got the highest grade of anyone. But I studied that online, part-time, whilst doing my very intense full-time corporate job and having 3 school-age kids. And I did it in about 15 months. It was super intense, incredibly demanding, definitely compromised sleep and energy, but I was genuinely enthralled by what I was learning and applying it, feeling a real sense of alignment. And I was big into, I was sort of starting my journey with mindfulness at that time. So I focused my academic research on mindfulness. So it was almost like these things were lining up in the universe. And so literally, I think I finished that around 2019, and I left the organization, a year later in the middle of COVID in 2020. But that was the journey by which I requalified. So yes, I did it on top of the day job. It was very intense. It was awkward in all sorts of ways. It was a big commitment, and it was worth every bit of it. And the Dr. Vic bit is because later, after leaving that organization, they awarded me an honorary doctorate because I kind of founded the university. I was a co-founder in a sense of the university, and they wanted to honor, I talked about that great chapter of my career. That was it. They wanted to honor the contribution I'd made. So, and they deemed it equivalent to doing a PhD because it was a lot of work. So yeah, that was how it all kind of came together to create the Dr. Vic that you see before you today.
That is so cool and gives me massive chills. I love that. And I also think it's really important to acknowledge how many women's educational trajectories are interrupted, and also how but I think what you've shown is that it's possible, obviously, with, you had a lot of things going on in your life, but it is possible. And I think that's a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing that. So if people want to find you, where can they find you? How can they connect with you? I think there will be some people listening to this that say, Dr. Vic's exactly what I need. So where will they find you if they're looking for you?
So on most channels, I'm at The Success Smith, which has one more S than you're expecting in the middle. We're on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm Victoria Stakelum on LinkedIn. And also there is a website, thesuccesssmith.com, which has lots of free resources, diagnostics, useful kind of resources. And we also run regular free events to help people start the journey toward change.
Oh, brilliant. Well, we're going to make sure we put that all in the show notes as well. So
great.
And we do want to do a shout out to Lisa Mellis, who is our head of brand and design at TechPixies and very good friends with Dr. Vic, and has been saying to me for months, you got to get her on the podcast. And she was 100% right. So thank you for your time today and for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. Hi, Lisa.
All right. Wow. That was so much fun. I don't often get to interview people that are in a similar space to me doing that subconscious reprogramming. It's so important, as you heard Dr. Vic talk about it. So, being able to identify the blocks and the barriers that are stopping you from moving forward, being able to tackle them, deal with them, and work with someone to do that is so important. So I would encourage you to check out Dr. Vic's links that will be in the show notes, and that might resonate with you. Thank you so much for listening or watching this podcast. I love being a part of your week every week, and I hope to see you or have you listen to us next week. And thanks again for giving us your time and your space today.